Okay.
Okay, we're recording. All right. So I'm going
Hi.
to do my presentation for you guys. Okay, everybody. My name is Param. I am the digital art teacher in training. I'm going to get into a little bit of my background. I have a Bachelor of Arts from McGill University, where I was an English major and a computer science minor. Um, I also have a BFA in fine arts. I majored in traditional animation. And then I have a certificate of completion from Think Tank Training Center, where I was a 3D environment modeling for games. And I worked as a game professional for 5 years. My background is I was like born in India. I came to the US, grew up in New York and New Jersey. My parents weren't really into me being an artist, so it took about like probably like 10 years of like fighting before like we could finally do art. But that was important to me because it meant that art was something that it wasn't just something I picked, it was something that I had to fight for, and that kind of made it like really significant and important to me. um, and now I'm gonna just get into some of my personal artwork. This is some of the social media artwork that I did. This was some of my professional work. So these were all done for social media games. The stuff that was done on the left was done when I used to work for Zynga, which is at that time they would make like a lot of Facebook games. So we usually had to design between 360 to 410 items in game, like furniture items, and then I had to design zones and stuff like that. Um, I also had to manage a team of artists, which meant like I kind of had to get used to and being comfortable giving instructions and sort of like explaining stuff to artists in a way that they could understand what they needed to make and what the style was that they needed to make. The image on the right was a digital painting that I had to make when I worked as a concept artist. For my second job after that one, I worked in it was an Argentinian company. They made slot machine games for mobile game device for like iPads and stuff like that. So this was the concept art that I would make that would go out to 3D artists. Um, my 3D artwork. This is some of the 3D like I used to do some 3D modeling. I used uh, Softimage at that time. It's not there anymore. And I also used 3ds Studio Max, and I would sort of create 3D assets and bring them into a game engine, which means you could sort of make like functional 3D assets that you could like engage in real time. And the image on the right was a 3D piece that I made to get my first professional job. That was for my art test. It was a Japanese inspired tea house. Um, and I made that in 3D software as well. And I did a lot of the hand painting and textures in Photoshop. Um, as I worked in games for about 5 years, but as time went on, I did start to feel like it was not a satisfying thing. And I did not enjoy working in a corporation. I knew that I needed to do some, like, I had to feel like I wanted to have like a sense of meaning in my work, and I just wasn't getting that in a corporation. So that's when I knew like art teaching was like kind of going to be my thing, because I could do art, but I could feel like, okay, like this actually means something. Um, so I came to Cal State Long Beach. I started my teacher's credential. One of the things that I have been things I was learning was photography. Um, this was some digital photography that I did last year. The image on the left was kind of inspired by Black Lives Matter, and the image on the right was LAX airport when COVID hit. I really like going out and sort of like capturing like things that are happening in the moment and sort of like seeing how it's like affecting society and stuff like that. Then also they did some ceramics. That was inspired by art history class I was taking. The image on the left was inspired by like Marduk, which is this ancient Mesopotamian like city god. And then the image on the right were some pinch pots that I made, and there were also a chance for me to try out glazing and different like enameled solutions that you could put on the pinch pots. Um, then this is some sketchbook art that I did. The image on the left I made in a coffee shop. That was a buddy of mine. His name's Mark. I actually sold that image, which is pretty awesome. And the image on the right was sort of like still lifes that I do on my own time just to kind of like keep my skills sharp, stuff like that. These are some traditional paintings. The image on the left is watercolor. I made that with a group of watercolor painters. We used to go around town during the weekends. And the image on the right is an acrylic painting that I made for my acrylic painting class. So my philosophy of teaching is that thinking independently is more important than the specific tools that you use. The tools are important, but the ability to think independently is what's really important and what matters. So learning means like, to me, it means like the ability to work on your art, analyze it, see if it's working, correct it, and then like reanalyze it again. That means that obstacles and challenges will be part of the learning process, but if you can get into this active kind of like learning, that's where the growth happens. And that's kind of a skill that you can use regardless of whether you're doing art or, you know, something else. It doesn't have to be art related. And the idea is in the art class, like you can also practice technical skills, which we'll get into in the lesson plan, and you can use them to create your own personal voice or creative message. The classroom, I like the idea of a classroom as an art workshop with an emphasis on creating universally designed lesson plans, which are sort of like open environments where you can modify it so that everybody can get something out of the workshop. I'd like to make have students work on technical skills so they can make culturally responsive pedagogical artworks that they can make it about whatever is relevant to them personally. And I like the idea of a workshop because it allows for socio-emotional learning as well. So as far as the lesson plans go, this is sort of my unit plan overall. The unit plan is, the idea overall is to make a music album cover for an album that is sort of like inspirational to the students. The first lesson plan is to like practice a digital drawing using composition and the rule of thirds. The second one is to like then learn a digital painting using composition and the rule of thirds. And then the third is to like builds off of both of those, where you take the digital painting and the compositional skills and you make a music album cover based on a song or an artist that really speaks to you. And these are some like examples of what they can look like. They don't have to be like this, but it's like a visual thing, like, okay, well, what could that look like? It could look like that. So that means during the unit, we'll be looking at art that ranges from like this, from like straight out of Compton to just like, you know, David Bowie. So how do we judge that? How do we look at these kinds of art? Well, the aesthetics model that we use is a little bit of Feldman and a little bit of McPhee. So we use Feldman in the sense that you want to focus on factual information, like making sure, you know, characteristics like smooth, bright, round, and analysis. Those are kind of like the more critical stuff. Feldman is more about, it's focusing on the technical side of the art. The McPhee stuff is more about cultural context and relativity. That's like, for example, the Straight Outta Compton. This was coming out of a time when like people were like artists were really forcefully saying like, hey, there's a police brutality problem that's happening. And that's kind of the cultural context. By the same token, the Aladdin Sane and David Bowie, these are ideas of like gender neutrality, which is like, you know, it's kind of more of a thing now. So it's like, there's elements of composition that are happening here. There's rule of thirds that's happening on the album covers, but there's also a deeper cultural context that these things are sort of getting into. And the idea is that students will, you know, when we look at these images, you can sort of organically get into art history, social justice, you know, all these kinds of things. Like, what do these images mean to the students or not mean to them? This is really the part where the students can talk about what's important and relevant to them. As well, the content standards that are going to be covered are artistic perception, which is developing perceptual skills and visual arts vocabulary, analyzing the material used by a given artist, as well as like aesthetics valuing, which means articulating personal beliefs, the cultural traditions, what's the meaning of these, you know, album covers, what do they mean today, are they relevant today, and that's the chance for the students to sort of tell me what they think about that. There's also Common Core standards as well, which means the speaking and listening standards. When we have the discussion, that's really our chance to get to them. It's a chance for students to like open up and kind of a fun way to talk about what they think is relevant to them, why they think that they find these things relevant. As well, we'll be getting into like technology. As a digital art teacher, technology is a critical component of like what we learn. I'd like to start with the Adobe suite, and if time permitting, it'd be really cool to get into like 3D software, Blender, digital compositing, film edit, or like maybe even Final Cut. I don't know, but like it's the idea is like for the kids who want to have an art career, this will give them a leg up. For the kids who, are just learning it casually, this is a chance to sort of like turn the cranks in their mind and learn how to learn and just explore learning new software and stuff like that. As far as getting into the specifics now, the lesson plan we'll be getting into is lesson 2, which is we'll be watching an animation video called Pocoyo. I'll be discussing some simple styles and what makes it work, like the sort of digital painting style that makes it work, and rule of thirds. We'll give a demo of how to make a simple digital painting, and then also it'll be providing like the strategy that'll being used is worked examples, spaced repetition, where students can watch the video again if they don't understand it. They have a model that they can look at. And then it's also like a video recording too. So for example, one of the students that we were given for this class, like theoretical student who came from an unstable background, if he's not in school a lot, he can see this video when he's at home. So it gives him a chance to kind of like keep up with the class, even if he's not able to be in class. And the idea is that students will pick a song they like. We'll make a digital drawing, which is prior knowledge assessment, which is picking off of the first lesson plan. It's taking elements from the first lesson plan, make a digital drawing, and then you build up on it where students will, use that drawing to make a digital painting. And then finally, students will critique each other's artwork. And then students will vote for the best in show, and a prize will be given. As far as discussion questions go, this is an image from the animation of Pocoyo. I'm just going to be asking them, like what shapes are being used, how is the like composition being used, how are the rule of thirds being used. These are some of the like broader kind of like technical discussion questions. The second lesson is sort of like, it's making sure that you sort of know how to do the A, B, and C so you can eventually get into the album cover, which is the third one. And the idea is at the end of the lesson, students will be able to have a basic practical digital painting technique that they can expand upon. They'll be able to use Photoshop and a Wacom tablet, and they'll be able to make a digital painting that uses composition and the rule of thirds. The lesson intro, as far as like setting the expectations for learning, at the beginning of the class, you start by saying like what we're going to do. For example, today we'll review the rule of thirds. We'll look at how to make a digital painting. So it's like, okay, this is what we're going to do today. Then the prior knowledge assessment, it's like asking like, okay, class, do you guys remember like what's the rule of thirds? And like a worked example, like, okay, we're going to make a digital painting. What would that look like? And boom, you show them an image. This is what it looks like. And then you utilize, like spaced repetition. I use a lot of repetition because you have to use a lot of repetition to get good at something. And then finally, at the end of class, the next steps for learning, the class will review what they've learned, tell me what they plan on doing next time. When asking the students what they've learned, they sort of do a modified 1-minute presentation where the students will explain what they learned in class, and they will explain it in their own words. It's also kind of like, again, I'm use a lot of spaced repetition, just reminding them like, hey guys, you got to make a rough drawing. Then once you make the rough drawing, then you want to make the finished like digital painting. And then sort of like a poster presentation, which is where the student shows the class like what their rough drawing looks like. The student Nicole over there is sort of holding up to the camera her kind of like rough drawing. And that's about it.
Yay.
Okay, thank you.
Good job.
All right, I'm just gonna stop share right now. Is that okay? Anybody need to keep looking at the slide or?
No, I don't need to see the slides.
Okay.
Let me just make a couple of comments before Devin has her time. Is that cool?
Yeah, no problem.
So what, in provided that you don't find a job doing digital art, do you feel confident that you'd be able to adapt some of your lesson plans that you've designed to a more traditional format?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely. 100%. Digital art is just like a tool. That's why I focused on the composition,
right.
because it wasn't like it was I wanted to focus on a theoretical art skill that you could use regardless of whether you use digital or even if you do like traditional.
Hmm.
So
Okay. And just some things to consider. These are just my observations, like when looking at your lesson plan as an experienced art teacher. What you could do to create more opportunities to hit the content standards is, you're actually addressing more content standards than what you referenced as far as the visual and performing arts standards, um, because you kind of were just focusing on perception and aesthetics a little bit, but they are doing some art making, so you may as well throw those in,
okay.
especially with hitting, the principles of design with the rule of thirds and composition and stuff. Um, and maybe you could also with, peer critiquing, you said a big part of your teaching philosophy is that you want students to look at their work and like repeat and try to find what's working and what's not working. But maybe using that Feldman's model for students to have some kind of a guide. I think us as artists, we know what we're looking for when we're assessing our own work, but to like make sure that the students understand what they're actually looking for when they're making those adjustments to their artwork. And yeah, you talked about some things with like technology and access to programs and Photoshop. And so it's just something you should think about, like how could you change it or strip it down to its most basic elements so it could work in any art class.
Yeah.
Um, but it's exciting and I love like your experience that you could also consider getting your CTE credential.
I guess.
It's an added bonus and
Yeah.
it gives you access to a lot more funding to really be able to secure like the Photoshop suite, and you can get Blender and you can get 3ds Max, like because you have to be a little bit I don't know, create well, you have to be a lot creative to be an art teacher, but sometimes you got to figure out how to like get your perfect setup in your classroom.
Yeah.
And
I was just
CTE,
hoping the principal would be like, here's a
yeah, you've got all this experience and you can teach these things that there's not a lot of art teachers that are able to, have that background and be able to teach digital art. So props to you.
Thank you.
But everything is good. Like I don't have any questions. You laid it all out for me, so we're all set.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And we're still recording, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
do you want to take
Yes,
a
we are.
separate one? Is that easier so you can send me the second one?
Oh yeah, you could stop and then start it up again.
Okay. Um, Kind of just wondering something.
Mhm.
If I end the lesson or if I end the thing, it's going to save the recording to a folder. Would it help if I ended it and then made a new Zoom meeting and just
That's,
Or
I don't
will
think you need a new meeting, but just a different recording.
yeah, you should be able to stop
I
the
knew is
recording and then start the recording again.
okay.
I don't know, but not the meeting, just the recording.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop the recording.
Okay.
No, I just want to make sure because I just want to make sure Devin's saying it. So then I'm just gonna stop it. That's cool, Devin?
We'll stop it and then start it again
Okay,
so that
cool.
they're separated.
All
So you
right.
don't have to edit.
Okay.
Thank you again. I'm on an iPad, so I can't use like all of Zoom.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
sorry. I didn't. Yeah, I've been a little underslept and I just should have hit there. Anyways, all right. All right. So I'm stopping.
sounds like a break.